they're afraid to raise the question in part because they don't know what to do. And I think that's a pretty pervasive feeling, unexpressed in the field of public education. Finally, this is the United States. You know, this is the place that talks about, well, you know, if you can put a man on the moon, then you can. We look for simple, quick, easy answers to very complicated problems. This problem that we're talking about is about as complicated and about as difficult as one that you can imagine. You don't see a lot of TV dramas about the difficulty that a teacher is presented when a third of his or her class is made up of kids who do not speak English at home, or whose families do not speak English at home. When the metric for measuring progress academically is your ability to read and write English. And that is, if you're in that position as a teacher, and don't have support and assistance and ideas being given to you about how to deal with this situation, if you're left on your own in isolation, you've got very, very little chance of figuring out what to do, particularly if you yourself cannot converse at all in Spanish. So we have a problem that we don't want to talk about fully, when we don't want to recognize how difficult and complicated it is. And if you have that situation, then you deflect attention off to things that sound plausible, sound good, sound effective, and we've been doing that for a very long time. We started off by saying, well, you know, there's just not enough money. Let's get more money. And back in 1965, the federal government stepped in a way where it had never before financed anything in elementary and secondary education except in science and in math, very limited programs there, to direct federal funds to schools where there are a lot of poor kids. Called Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It's still around. It turned out that money itself, if you don't know how to spend it, doesn't change the equation very effectively. I live and have worked in a state which spends more money in poor school districts than it spends in wealthy school districts. We are the highest spending state in the country, so we're talking about real money. And there are districts that have $25,000, $26,000 a year per student, where the educational results are no better than they were when they were spending half that amount. But money is frequently offered as the obstacle. But we offer all sorts of other reforms. Right now, the hot topic for dealing with this issue is to charter more charter schools, to give more money to existing charter schools, to hold teachers more accountable for educational performance in their classrooms, and to tie, for example, their compensation to how well their kids do on standardized tests. Those seem to be the two directions most favored by the Obama administration, but they reflect a pattern of what I would call our serial reforms or serial enthusiasms. They last a couple of years, they're tried, they don't work, another one comes along. We keep bouncing from one reform to another, and that's been the pattern. A couple things that happened during the presidency of Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society president, that bear on this, which had a profound effect on the way we view education. I want to just take a moment to describe these, actually, two scholars who were responsible for these events. In one case, there was an assistant secretary of labor who was, I think, 33 years old. He was called the assistant secretary for policy and analysis in the Department of Labor. He was a kid who had grown up in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of Manhattan, had somehow gotten into a single mother, had gotten into Tufts, went to work for Abraham Harriman, the governor of New York, was active in the Kennedy campaign, was taught at Harvard. He was a guy who loved to look at tables of data. His name was Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He was looking at the data from produced by the Census Department in 1963, for the year 1963. And his eye was caught, his attention was drawn to this fact that troubled him mightily, and he put together a small team of his colleagues and got him working to produce a report on this, triggered by this fact. And the fact was that over the previous 15 years, the percentage of black, then called Negro children, born to single parents, had grown from 14% to 24%. And he thought that this was a development of such importance that there needed to be a report produced for the president and for the nation on the implications of this development. It's called the Negro Family in America. It was produced in the spring of 1965. It didn't receive any attention until the Watts riots took place in Los Angeles. And the White House, sort of stymied by this uprising in Watts that was the most destructive and more property damage and more people killed, and the National Guard called in since, I guess, the Detroit riots of '43. Said that the Moynihan report would be a helpful explanation for what was going on. And it became an object of attention first, widely accepted that this did represent a troubling development, a troubling trend, and his point was pretty straightforward. And that is that the process of education, of socialization, of nurture and support is best done in a family with biological parents present. And that if this trend continued, that it would hold, it would have strong negative effects on, yes, black families and on their neighborhoods in terms of the employability, in terms of the education levels that would be achieved, etc. And while this report was not widely circulated and was at first pretty widely accepted, by the fall it was the object of a very powerful attack by people inside the civil rights movement. If you've ever heard the phrase blaming the victim, that's where that phrase comes from. That this was an irresponsible report, an effort to cast aspersion on black Americans, and it was disavowed by the administration. There was a civil rights conference held that was supposed to be built around the issues raised by this report, where it was pretty much taken off the agenda, and Moynihan wasn't even invited to the conference. The importance of this was, though, far beyond what happened in 1965.